If I lose my family but gain you, I still win. Have you ever heard someone risk everything for a stranger? That's what Han Ji-yoon said to Amara Blake on a rain-soaked rooftop in Manhattan, moments before his entire world collapsed. A mafia heir choosing a woman over his empire. A CEO who'd rather die than compromise her values. This isn't a story about falling in love at first sight. This is about two people who met in a dark alley, saved each other's lives, and discovered that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand beside someone when the whole world says you should run. The black umbrella tilted toward her, not him. Rain dripped from the edge, soaking his shoulder while she stayed dry. That single gesture told you everything you needed to know. Power can bow before integrity, if you're brave enough to choose it. But to understand how they got there, you have to go back to the night it all started. Times Square never sleeps, but at 11 at night, it breathes differently. The neon lights still flash, tourists still stumble between crosswalks, but in the gaps between the noise, you can hear the city's real heartbeat. That's where Amara Blake walked, her heels clicking against wet pavement, a contract folder pressed against her ribs. She'd just left a meeting with investors who thought money could buy anything. They'd offered her $10 million for Blake MedTech, her medical AI company. All she had to do was sign away patient privacy protections. A clause buried in paragraph 9, written in language designed to look harmless. She said no. Now she walked alone, replaying the moment the lead investor called her unrealistic. She didn't feel unrealistic. She felt clear. Her grandmother used to say, "If you can't sleep with your choices, don't make them in the first place." The alley shortcut was familiar. She'd taken it 100 times. But tonight, two men stepped out from behind a dumpster. One wore a Yankees cap pulled low. The other had a scar running from his ear to his jaw. They weren't looking at her. They were looking past her, at a wealthy African businessman in a camel hair coat who'd been walking behind her. But when that businessman turned the corner quickly, sensing trouble, she was still there. Alone, holding a leather folder that looked expensive enough to steal. "Hey," the scarred man said, his voice deceptively casual. "Hand it over." Amara's pulse kicked up. She'd grown up in neighborhoods where you learned to read danger in the tilt of a man's shoulders. These two weren't desperate. They were professionals. "I don't have cash. And this folder's worthless to you." Yankee's cap stepped closer. "We'll decide that." She backed up, her heel catching on uneven pavement. The contract folder slipped, papers scattered. And then headlights swept across the alley, bright and sudden. A black car braked hard, tires screeching. The door opened before the engine even stopped. He stepped out like he owned the night itself. Han Ji-yoon wore a black suit that probably cost more than her first car. His face was angular, chiseled, colder than winter stone. His eyes swept over the scene once, cataloging everything, then settled on her. Not the men. Her. "I'm fine," Amara said quickly, because the last thing she needed was another man deciding what she could handle. "Don't call the police. I can handle it myself." Ji-yoon's gaze dropped to her hands. She'd scraped her palm, catching herself against the brick wall. Blood smeared across her wrist. His voice, when it came, was quiet but sharp as a blade. "No one is fine when they're shaking." Yankee's cap pulled a knife. Scarred man reached for her shoulder. Ji-yoon moved. 3 seconds. That's all it took. He didn't shout or threaten. He just stepped between her and them with precision that came from years of training. Yankee's cap swung. Ji-yoon caught his wrist, twisted, and the knife clattered to the ground. Scarred man lunged. Ji-yoon sidestepped, using the man's momentum to send him crashing into a trash bin. He never touched her. Never even came close. When it was over and both men were running, Ji-yoon stepped back, leaving space between them, respecting her boundary even though she hadn't asked for it. That was the first time Amara realized, this man sees me, not as someone who needs saving, as someone who deserves the choice. She bent to gather her papers, hands still trembling despite what she'd said. Ji-yoon crouched beside her, picking up a contract page that had landed near his shoe. He didn't read it, just handed it back, his fingers careful not to brush hers. "Thank you," she said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. He nodded once. "You should clean that hand." Then he returned to his car, and she thought that was the end of it. A strange, unsettling encounter with a man who moved like violence but chose restraint. She had no idea he'd been in New York for 3 weeks, handling his family's money laundering operation through medical technology fronts. No idea that the alley where he'd found her was 2 blocks from a meeting with the very investors she'd just refused. No idea that in saving her, he'd begun to question everything he thought he knew about power. The 24-hour cafe smelled like burnt coffee and forgotten cinnamon rolls. Amara sat in a corner booth, her hand wrapped in napkins from the bathroom dispenser, scrolling through her phone for the nearest urgent care. She didn't need a police report. She needed to go home, shower, and forget tonight had happened. The door chimed. Ji-yoon walked in, his black suit somehow still immaculate despite the alley fight. He ordered an Americano at the counter, his voice carrying a slight accent. The barista smiled at him the way people smile at beautiful, dangerous things they don't quite understand. Amara stood, intending to leave through the side door, but something made her stop. Maybe it was the way he'd handed back her papers without reading them. Maybe it was the space he'd left between them. The boundary he'd honored without being asked. She walked to the counter and gestured to the barista. "His coffee's on me. He helped me tonight." The barista glanced between them, clearly trying to piece together their story. Ji-yoon turned, his expression unreadable. "That's not necessary. You didn't have to help me either. But you did. So now we're even." She thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. He nodded, accepting the gesture, and she turned to leave. That's when her CEO card slipped from her pocket. It skidded across the tile floor and landed near his shoe. Black matte finish, embossed gold lettering, Amara Blake, CEO, Blake MedTech. Ji-yoon picked it up slowly. He studied it longer than necessary, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. When he looked up, she was already halfway to the door, shouldering her bag, completely unaware she'd left behind the one thing that would change everything. He pocketed the card, paid for both coffees, and walked out into the New York night with a single thought. A CEO who pays for a stranger's coffee and refuses $10 million in the same evening. Who is she? In his world, people were predictable. They wanted money, power, or protection from consequences. Amara Blake had walked away from money. She'd refused help even when she needed it. And she'd thanked him not because he was impressive, but because simple decency still mattered to her. For the first time in years, Han Ji-yoon felt something stir beneath the cold calculation that had kept him alive. Curiosity. And something more dangerous. Respect. The next morning, he would learn her name was already on a list his family kept. A list of targets. A list of people whose technology could be bought, borrowed, or taken. And he would have to decide. Protect the business that made him who he was, or protect the woman who reminded him of who he could have been. What happens when the person you're supposed to destroy is the only one who makes you feel human? If this story is pulling at something in your heart, stay with us. And if you want more stories like this, ones that believe in second chances and hard-won love, subscribe and let me know in the comments what drew you here tonight. The meeting room in New Jersey smelled like leather and expensive cigars, though no one was smoking. 3 men sat around a glass table: Ji-yoon, a local gang lieutenant named Chen, and a lawyer who never gave his real name. Outside the window, the Hudson River glittered under gray morning light. Chen slid a folder across the table. "This is the Perfect Front, medical AI company, processes patient data across 12 hospitals. We route the money through insurance reimbursements, claim processing fees, data licensing. Clean as snow. The lawyer nodded, flipping to a page with a photograph clipped to the top. A professional headshot. The CEO is Amara Blake, self-made. No family money, no connections, just a church loan and determination. Ji-yoon had already read the file. Twice. He'd stayed up until 3 in the morning researching Blake Medtech after pocketing her CEO card. Amara had founded it 7 years ago with a prototype built in her grandmother's basement. She'd turned it into a $40 million company by focusing on underserved patients, using AI to catch early-stage illnesses in communities that couldn't afford specialists. Chen grinned. She's been refusing meetings for 6 months, but we've got leverage now. Her company's board is pushing for an acquisition. We make an offer she can't refuse, bury our terms in the contract, and by the time she realizes what she signed, we're already operational. The lawyer leaned forward, confident. She'll sign. A woman like her doesn't refuse money. They never do. Ji-yoon's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Because last night she had refused money. She'd walked away from $10 million. She'd wrapped her bleeding hand in cafe napkins and paid for a stranger's coffee instead of going to the hospital. When he'd offered to call the police, she'd said no, not out of fear, but because she wanted to handle her own life. Ji-yoon closed the folder slowly. I'll handle this negotiation personally. Chen raised an eyebrow. You don't do small-time deals. This isn't small, Ji-yoon said. He stood buttoning his suit jacket, and the meeting was over. Not because he'd dismissed them, but because when Han Ji-yoon was done talking, everyone else knew it. In the car on the way back to Manhattan, his driver glanced in the rearview mirror. Boss, you've never taken an interest in a target before. What's different about this one? Ji-yoon looked out at the city sliding past. Cranes and construction sites, glass towers reflecting gray sky, people rushing between buildings like ants in a colony that never stopped moving. He thought about the way Amara had said, "I'm fine," even when she wasn't. The way she'd looked at her scattered papers like they mattered more than her safety. She's not motivated by fear or greed, he said quietly. That makes her unpredictable. His driver said nothing. But Ji-yoon knew the truth. It wasn't unpredictability that interested him, it was integrity. And in his world, integrity was the rarest, most valuable thing a person could have, because people with integrity didn't negotiate. They didn't bend. Which meant if he wanted to protect her, and he was beginning to realize he did, he'd have to go against everything his family had built. The question wasn't whether she'd sign. The question was whether he'd let them force her. The financial district boardroom had floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city look like a toy model. 30 stories below, taxis honked, and pedestrians dodged puddles. Inside, the air conditioning was so cold Amara could see her breath. Or maybe that was nerves. She sat across from 3 men in expensive suits. Her lawyer sat beside her, already sweating despite the temperature. The lead investor, a man named Garrett who'd been trying to buy Blake Medtech for 8 months, smiled like a shark that had finally cornered its prey. Ms. Blake, Garrett said, sliding a contract across the polished table. We've revised the terms. $45 million, full acquisition. You retain a board seat and creative control for 3 years. It's more than generous. Amara opened the folder. She'd learned to read contracts the way her grandmother read people, by watching for what they didn't say. And there, buried on page 16, was the same clause she'd seen before. Slightly reworded, but the intent was identical. Company retains unlimited rights to patient data for third-party licensing and monetization. She looked up. You're still selling patient information? Garrett's smile didn't waver. We're maximizing data assets. It's standard in the industry. It's not standard in mine. Amara pushed the contract back. I built Blake Medtech to protect vulnerable patients, not exploit them. The answer is no. One of the silent investors finally spoke. his tone dripping with condescension. Ms. Blake, we're offering you financial security. At your age, with your background, you should be grateful. My background? Amara's voice stayed level, but something sharp entered it. The kind of sharpness that came from a lifetime of people assuming she'd arrived at success by luck, rather than 12-hour days and sleepless nights. You mean the part where I bootstrapped this company from zero? Or the part where I've turned down 4 acquisition offers because none of them respected what I built? The investor flushed. Garrett held up a hand. Let's not get emotional. I'm not emotional. I'm clear. I choose the truth. I don't choose shortcuts. That's when the door opened, and Han Ji-yoon walked in. He wore a different suit, charcoal gray this time, but the effect was the same. Presence, authority, power that didn't need announcing. He took the empty chair at the head of the table, the seat no one else had dared claim, and folded his hands. Amara's pulse jumped. She recognized him instantly, the man from the alley. The one who'd fought off 2 robbers and never touched her. What was he doing here? Garrett's smile widened, misreading the situation entirely. Ah, Mr. Han. Perfect timing. Ms. Blake was just refusing your offer, Ji-yoon said quietly. His gaze settled on Amara, and for a moment something passed between them. Recognition, understanding. And beneath that, something neither was ready to name. Garrett blinked. I'm sorry? She said no. Ji-yoon leaned back in his chair, and the room's temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. I heard her the first time. So did you. With all due respect, the sweating investor said, you're here as a silent shareholder. This is our negotiation. Not anymore. Ji-yoon stood, and the movement was so controlled, so deliberate, that everyone else froze. He picked up the contract, glanced at page 16, then set it down with precision that made it clear he'd read every word, and found it wanting. He looked directly at Amara. For 3 seconds, the boardroom disappeared. It was just the 2 of them, and the unspoken question hanging between them. Why are you defending me? Ji-yoon smiled then, faintly, but it reached his eyes. The first real smile she'd seen from him. Then he turned back to Garrett, and the smile vanished. Ms. Blake has made her position clear. She's not selling her company. And she's definitely not selling her patients. He pushed the documents aside with one finger, a gesture of dismissal so absolute it felt like a physical barrier. The meeting is over. No one is forcing her to sign. Garrett's face went red. We had an agreement. You had an expectation. That's not the same thing. Ji-yoon moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at Amara. You said last night you could handle it yourself. I believe you. But if you need someone to make sure they hear you the first time, call me. He placed a business card on the table in front of her. Black matte, gold lettering. No title, just a phone number. Then he left, and the room erupted into barely controlled fury. Garrett was shouting about breached contracts. The investors were threatening lawsuits. Amara's lawyer was frantically taking notes, clearly out of his depth. But Amara just stared at the business card. This man, this stranger who'd saved her in an alley, had just torpedoed a $45 million deal. For her. Without asking for anything in return. She picked up the card, turned it over. On the back, in handwriting that was surprisingly elegant, he'd written, Your CEO card. You left it at the cafe? That's when she understood. He'd known who she was. He'd known this meeting was happening. And he'd come anyway. He'd chosen her side. In her world, people didn't do that without wanting something. But when she replayed the conversation, searching for his angle, all she found was one sentence. No one is forcing her to sign. Not because he wanted her company. Because he believed she had the right to say no. Because he'd looked at her refusal and seen strength, not stubbornness, integrity, not naivety. For the first time since her grandmother died, Amara Blake felt something crack open in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of it. The recognition that maybe, just maybe, there were still people in the world who valued principle over profit. She slipped the card into her pocket and walked out of the boardroom, leaving Garrett and his investors shouting behind her. Outside, the city hummed with afternoon traffic. Somewhere in that chaos, Han Ji-yoon was returning to whatever world he came from. A world she suspected was far more dangerous than a boardroom full of angry investors. But he'd stood up for her. And in Amara's experience, actions spoke louder than any contract ever could. The envelope arrived at midnight. Amara heard the knock while she was reviewing code for Blake Medtech's latest diagnostic algorithm, her temporary hotel suite quiet except for the hum of her laptop and distant sirens outside. She'd been staying at the Marriott near Times Square for the past week, too exhausted after back-to-back investor meetings to make the commute to Brooklyn. She opened the door to find no one there, just a thick manila envelope propped against the frame. Inside, $500,000 in cashier's checks. And a note, typed on expensive cardstock. We can revise the contract to your exact specifications. Data protections, patient privacy, full creative control. Name your terms. Just sign. Gee. She knew it was supposed to be from Garrett, but something about the precision of the offer, the way it anticipated every objection she'd raised, felt different, smarter. Like someone had studied her refusals and engineered the perfect temptation. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Did you receive the package? She stared at the message. Then, instead of responding, she gathered the checks, put them back in the envelope, and took the elevator down to the lobby. The night security guard looked up from his crossword puzzle, startled to see her in pajama pants and a Howard University sweatshirt. Can I help you, Ms. Blake? I need you to return this to whoever delivered it. She handed him the envelope, her voice firm. And if they ask, tell them exactly what I said. I'm not selling my company. And I'm definitely not selling my soul. The guard's eyebrows shot up when he felt the weight. Ma'am, this is not mine, please. It's important they know I sent it back. She went back upstairs, hands shaking slightly as she locked the door. Part of her wondered if she was insane. $500,000. Enough to pay off her remaining business loans. Enough to hire the 3 engineers she desperately needed. Enough to stop checking her account balance every morning and hoping the numbers would stretch. But her grandmother's voice was clear in her head. Baby, money that comes with strings isn't freedom. It's just a prettier cage. 20 minutes later, her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. But this time, the message was different. I wondered if you'd return it. You passed. She frowned at the screen. Passed what? The response came immediately. The only test that matters. And then she knew. It wasn't Garrett who'd sent the envelope. It was Ji-yoon, testing her. Seeing if she meant what she'd said in that boardroom, or if she was just performing integrity for an audience. Seeing if she really couldn't be bought. Anger flared hot in her chest. She called the number without thinking. He picked up on the first ring. You tested me? Her voice was quiet, dangerous. You dangled money in front of me like I'm some kind of... I needed to know. His voice was calm, measured. In my world, everyone has a price. I needed to know if you really didn't. That's not your decision to make. You're right. The admission surprised her enough that she stopped mid-breath. It wasn't fair. But fairness isn't something I can afford. I needed to know who I can trust. And now I know I can trust you. Why does it matter if you can trust me? I don't even know you. Silence, long enough that she almost thought the call had dropped. Then, because the people I work for are going to come after your company whether you sign or not, and I'd rather you know what you're up against before it's too late. Cold settled into her stomach. What do you mean? Meet me tomorrow, noon. The steps of the New York Public Library. I'll explain everything. He paused, And when he spoke again, his voice carried something that sounded almost like concern. "And Amara, don't come alone. Bring someone you trust. I'm asking you to be smart, not brave." The line went dead. She stood there holding her phone, heart hammering, mind racing through possibilities. She'd thought the boardroom rejection was the end of it. But if Ji-yoon was warning her, if he was telling her to bring protection to a public meeting, this wasn't about business anymore. This was about survival. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? A mysterious man who saved her from muggers and tanked a business deal was now warning her about unspecified danger? They'd tell her to file a report and get a restraining order, neither of which would stop the kind of people Ji-yoon seemed to be talking about. No. If she wanted answers, she'd have to meet him. And she'd have to decide. Right then, standing in her hotel room with sirens wailing outside, whether this man was her greatest threat or her only ally. She looked at the business card still sitting on the desk. Black matte, gold lettering. A phone number that connected her to a world she'd spent her whole life avoiding. Her grandmother used to say, "Sometimes the devil you know is better than the angel you don't." But what if the devil was the one trying to keep you safe? The library meeting changed everything. Amara brought her business partner, Keisha, who'd grown up in the South Bronx and didn't trust men in expensive suits. "If this goes sideways," Keisha muttered as they climbed the library steps, "I'm not above defending us however necessary." Ji-yoon was waiting exactly where he said he'd be, looking different in daylight. Still commanding, but somehow more human, like the sun had found edges his nighttime persona kept hidden. What he told them was this: his family ran one of the largest Korean mafia operations in North America. Money laundering mostly. They'd moved away from violent crime years ago, focusing instead on financial networks that were technically legal but morally corrupt. Medical billing, real estate, tech startups. And they'd set their sights on Blake MedTech because patient data was the new currency. "They don't want to buy your company," Ji-yoon said, his voice low and urgent. "They want to control it. Route money through your billing systems. Use your hospital contracts as cover. And if you won't cooperate, they'll find someone on your board who will." He pulled out a flash drive. "Copy every piece of financial data you have onto this. Backdoor everything. Make it so that if they try to take over your company, you can prove where the money's really going. Then you give that proof to the FBI. Not now. When you have enough evidence to take down the whole network." Amara took the flash drive. "And what happens to you?" For the first time, something flickered across Ji-yoon's face. Not fear exactly, but recognition of consequence. "I go back to my family, keep them focused on other targets. Buy you time." That night, Amara and Keisha worked until 3 in the morning, copying files, encrypting data, building the digital fortress Ji-yoon had suggested. But Amara did something else, something she didn't tell Keisha about until later. She'd noticed a pattern in her company's recent billing requests. Small discrepancies. Charges that didn't quite match patient visits. Someone had already started routing money through Blake MedTech's systems without her authorization. It was subtle enough that her accounting team had missed it, buried in the thousands of legitimate transactions they processed daily. But Amara saw it, and she made a choice. She didn't just copy the evidence, she blocked the pipeline, changed her banking protocols, added a 2-factor authentication system that would flag any unusual transactions over $10,000. Then she sent an automated email to every board member, every hospital partner, every investor on record, explaining the new security measures as routine cybersecurity updates. It was the digital equivalent of slamming a door in the mafia's face, and she knew it. Keisha stared at her when she explained what she'd done. "You just shut down their money laundering operation." "I protected my company," Amara corrected, but her hands were shaking. "Amara, if they find out, they'll already know." Amara looked at the clock. 3:47 a.m. Somewhere in this city, someone was discovering that millions of dollars were now stuck in a pipeline that had suddenly, inexplicably closed. They'll know by morning, maybe sooner. Her phone buzzed. Text from Ji-yoon. What did you do? She stared at the message, typed back. What I had to. His response came 5 minutes later. Don't go to the office tomorrow. Don't follow any routine. Don't be predictable. They will come for you now. Keisha grabbed her arm. We need to call the police. Right now. And tell them what? That I blocked some suspicious transactions and now I think organized crime is after me? They'll tell me to file a report. They won't give me protection based on a hunch. It's not a hunch if he's warning you. No, Amara said slowly. It's confirmation. For 2 days, nothing happened. Amara worked from the hotel. Keisha stayed with her. Ji-yoon sent periodic texts, brief, cryptic updates that she was being watched, that his family was arguing about how to respond, that she should avoid the Brooklyn Bridge at night. She made a mistake on the 3rd day. She went to the office anyway, because she was stubborn and independent, and refused to let fear control her schedule. She told herself it would be fine. It was a quick trip, in and out, just to grab some hard drives she needed for the FBI documentation she was building. She left at 11 p.m., after most of the building had emptied. Took the route home she always took, across the Brooklyn Bridge where the city lights reflected off the water and made everything look almost peaceful. That's where they found her. The black SUV came out of nowhere. It slammed into her driver's side door, sending her sedan spinning toward the railing. Amara screamed, hands locked on the wheel, trying to regain control. But the SUV hit her again, harder this time, with the kind of precision that said this wasn't road rage, this was elimination. Her car crashed through the protective barrier. For one terrible moment, she was airborne. The bridge lights wheeled above her. The East River below looked black as oil, and she thought, this is how it ends. Not in a boardroom, not with dignity, but alone, in the dark, because I dared to say no. Then the car hit the edge of the support beam and tipped, hood first, toward the water. The windshield spiderwebbed. She smelled smoke and gasoline, heard the shriek of metal tearing, the seatbelt locked across her chest, stealing her breath. Through the shattered side window she saw flames, orange and hungry and spreading fast. Someone was shouting her name. She couldn't tell if it was real or hallucination. Her vision tunneled. Then hands were on her door, wrenching it open with superhuman force. Strong arms reached in, cut her seatbelt, and pulled her out of the car just as the engine exploded behind her. Ji-yoon carried her 30 feet away from the wreckage before the second explosion hit. He set her down on the bridge deck, his hands checking her for injuries, his voice saying her name over and over like a prayer. Amara, Amara, look at me, stay with me. Her ears were ringing, her ribs hurt, her head was bleeding where she'd hit the doorframe. But what terrified her most was the way he was looking at her. Like he'd arrived 2 seconds later, he would have lost something irreplaceable. Don't let me be your burden, Amara whispered. Because even now, even bleeding and broken on the Brooklyn Bridge, she couldn't stand the thought of someone sacrificing themselves for her. She'd spent her whole life proving she didn't need saving, didn't need carrying, didn't need anyone to fight her battles. No, Ji-yoon said, and his voice cracked. The cold, controlled Mafia Heir was gone. In his place was just a man who'd driven 100 miles an hour to get here in time. A man whose hands were shaking as they cupped her face. You're not my burden. You're the only person who makes me believe I can be better than what I was born into. In the distance, ambulance sirens wailed. Someone was shouting about calling 911. Drivers had stopped their cars, were running toward them. But in that moment, on the Brooklyn Bridge with fire at their backs and the city glittering around them, Amara Blake reached up and touched his face. Her fingers came away smudged with soot and blood, but she didn't care. Who did this? She asked, though she already knew. My family. The admission broke something in his voice. They found out you sabotaged the operation, blocked $3 million in one night. This was their warning. Next time. He couldn't finish the sentence. Amara closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the world had tilted. Darkness crept in from the edges. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was Ji-yoon's face above hers, and the way his expression had transformed from cold calculation into something that looked like devastation. He'd saved her. But in doing so, he'd confirmed to his family that she mattered to him, that she was leverage, that hurting her was the fastest way to control him. And somehow, lying there on the Brooklyn Bridge with sirens screaming and fire crackling, that seemed like the saddest, most beautiful thing anyone had ever done for her. The paramedics arrived. Ji-yoon rode in the ambulance with her, his hand wrapped around hers, his voice telling her to stay awake, stay with him, don't leave. She tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Just darkness, pulling her under like the river below. Her last thought before everything went black. I did this. I shut down their operation. I brought this war to both of us. And his last words before she lost consciousness. I'll make this right. I promise you, Amara. I'll make this right. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and artificial flowers. Amara woke to fluorescent lights and the steady beep of a heart monitor. Her left arm was in a cast. Her ribs were wrapped. And there, standing by the window like a stone sentinel, was one of Ji-yoon's bodyguards. She tried to sit up. Pain shot through her side. Where is he? The bodyguard, a man with careful eyes that had seen too much, turned slowly. Mr. Han is handling the situation. What situation? The one where his family tried to eliminate you, and he's now considered a traitor to the organization. The bodyguard said it without emotion, like he was discussing the weather. He asked me to stay here until you wake up. Make sure you're safe. Amara's throat tightened. Is he? He's alive. For now. But Ms. Blake, you need to understand something. The life he chose to save you? He can't go back to it. His father has disowned him. His brothers want him gone. He's burned every bridge he had. The door opened. Ji-yoon walked in, and Amara's breath caught. He looked exhausted, haunted. There was a bruise darkening his left cheekbone, and his knuckles were wrapped in bandages. But when his eyes met hers, something in his expression softened. You're awake. You look terrible, she said. Her voice came out hoarse. You nearly died. He crossed to her bedside, his movements careful, like he was afraid she might shatter. I should have anticipated they'd move that fast. I should have protected you better. Don't. Amara shook her head, immediately regretted it as pain spiked behind her eyes. Don't apologize for saving my life. I'm not apologizing for that. I'm apologizing for bringing you into my world in the first place. You were right to be angry. I come from darkness. My family is dangerous. And you almost died because I couldn't walk away from you. Silence filled the room. The heart monitor beeped. Outside the window, New York hummed with afternoon traffic. Somewhere in this city, people were living normal lives. Going to work, picking up groceries, arguing about parking spots. None of them knew that in this hospital room, two people were deciding whether love was worth the cost. I don't belong in your dangerous world, Amara said finally. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. I can't live like this, looking over my shoulder, wondering if every car that gets too close is another attack. I know. Ji-yoon's jaw tightened. That's why I'm giving you a choice. He stepped back, and Amara saw it then. The metaphorical crossroads he'd built. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just two options, laid out with the same precision he brought to everything else. There's a left staircase and a right staircase in this hospital. The left one, you take it, you walk away. I make sure you're protected. I use every remaining contact I have to keep my family away from Blake MedTech permanently. You go back to your life, build your company, help your patients, and you never see me again." Amara's heart clenched. "And the right staircase?" "The right staircase," Ji-yoon said. And now his voice carried something she'd never heard before: hope, fragile and uncertain. "You stay. We take down the money laundering network together. You use your technology and the evidence you've already gathered to help the FBI build a case. I testify against my family. We destroy the entire operation. We regain your freedom and mine. And when it's over, if we're both still alive, we see if there's something here worth building." He moved closer, and she could see the cost of the last 72 hours written in the shadows under his eyes. "But I need you to understand what the right staircase means. It means months of danger. It means you can't trust anyone except me and Keisha. It means your company will be under scrutiny. It means choosing a life that's harder, scarier, and completely uncertain." "Why would I choose that?" Amara whispered. But she already knew the answer. She'd known it since he'd carried her away from that burning car. "Because I don't protect you, because you need it. I protect you because you're the only person I've met who doesn't use power to force others. You use it to lift them." His voice dropped. "You're inspirational, Amara. You make me believe I can be someone better. You make me want to fight for something besides money and survival." Amara looked at him. Really looked. Past the expensive suit and the dangerous reputation. Past the Mafia Heir and the man who'd tested her with money. She saw someone who'd given up everything because hurting her meant becoming someone he couldn't live with. Someone who'd chosen integrity over inheritance. And she thought about her grandmother, who used to say that the right choice wasn't always the easy one. Sometimes the right choice was the one that terrified you. The one that asked you to be braver than you ever thought possible. "There's a third option," Amara said. Her voice was soft but certain. "We take down your family. We expose the network. We do it together, as equals. And when it's over, we don't see if there's something worth building. We build it. Intentionally. With our eyes open." Ji-yoon's expression shifted. Something like wonder crossed his face. "You're sure?" "I'm terrified. But I'm also clear. You asked me once why integrity matters. This is why. Because when everything else falls apart, it's the only thing that tells you who you are. And right now, the person I am is someone who doesn't run. Someone who finishes what she starts." She held out her uninjured hand. "Partners?" He took it. His grip was warm, solid, real. "Partners." The bodyguard cleared his throat. "If you're both determined to proceed, we should move quickly. The FBI has been waiting for evidence like yours for 3 years. And Mr. Han's testimony could bring down 6 organizations, not just one." Amara looked at Ji-yoon. "You'd really testify against your own father?" "He tried to kill you," Ji-yoon said simply. "The moment he did that, he stopped being my father. Now he's just a criminal who needs to face justice." And in that hospital room, with danger waiting outside and an impossible future stretching ahead, they made a choice that neither of them could take back. Not because it was romantic, not because it was easy, but because sometimes doing what's right and doing what's hard are exactly the same thing. The rooftop overlooked Manhattan like a throne overlooking a kingdom. 3 months had passed since the bridge attack. 3 months of FBI interviews, encrypted files, and building a case so airtight that not even the best lawyers money could buy would find a crack. Now, rain fell in sheets, turning the city lights into watercolor smears. It was the kind of rain that soaked through clothes in seconds, that made the world feel both infinite and impossibly small. Amara stood there with a waterproof tablet in her hands, pulling up file after file of evidence: bank transfers, shell company registrations, Patient data that had been quietly sold to pharmaceutical companies without consent. Everything Ji-yoon's family had built, every illegal operation they'd hidden behind legitimate businesses, was cataloged in this device. Behind her, FBI agents waited in tactical positions, their presence invisible but certain. And beside her, Han Ji-yoon stood with his hands in his pockets, rain streaming down his face, watching his old life burn. "They're here," he said quietly. 3 black cars pulled up to the building's entrance. His father emerged from the first, flanked by bodyguards, his older brother from the second. And from the third, the investors who'd tried to buy Blake Medtech, Garrett and his associates, now revealed as fronts for the family's operation. Amara's heart hammered. This was it, the moment that would either free them or destroy them completely. Ji-yoon's father looked up at the rooftop. Even from this distance, Amara could see the cold fury in his expression. He'd raised his youngest son to be a weapon. Instead, Ji-yoon had become a conscience, an inconvenience, a traitor. The FBI agent in charge, a woman named Chen who'd spent 2 years trying to crack this organization, touched her earpiece. "We have visual confirmation. All primary targets are on site. Ms. Blake, you're clear to transmit." Amara pressed send. The evidence uploaded to FBI servers, simultaneously forwarding to journalists at The Times, The Post, and 3 investigative outlets known for their protection of whistleblowers. There was no taking it back now. In less than 5 minutes, the world would know everything. Ji-yoon's phone rang. His father. He answered on speaker so Amara could hear. "You've destroyed this family." His father's voice was flat, emotionless, terrifying in its calm. "No, I stopped us from destroying innocent people. There's a difference. You threw away your inheritance, your name, your brother's futures. For what? A woman you barely know?" Ji-yoon looked at Amara. Rain soaked his hair, plastered his shirt to his shoulders, but his eyes were clear. "For someone who reminded me what integrity looks like, someone who showed me that power without conscience isn't power at all. It's just violence in a suit." Amara's throat tightened. She'd spent 3 months watching him transform, watching him sit through FBI interviews where he detailed every operation, every account, every person involved. Watching him accept that testifying against his family meant permanent exile, possible retaliation, and a future built on nothing but hope and determination. He'd done it anyway, because when she'd asked him why he was willing to risk everything, he'd said, "Because you chose me when I gave you every reason not to." And that kind of grace doesn't come along twice. Downstairs, sirens erupted. Blue and red lights flooded the street as FBI vehicles surrounded the building. Agents emerged, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands. Ji-yoon's father didn't run. He stood there, hands at his sides, watching his empire collapse with the same cold calculation he'd used to build it. Ji-yoon's brother tried to reach for his weapon. 3 agents tackled him before he could draw. Garrett and the investors scattered, but there was nowhere to go. Agent Chen had planned this operation like a chess master. Every exit was blocked, every contingency anticipated. It was over in less than 10 minutes. The entire network dismantled. 15 arrests, millions of dollars frozen. And on that rooftop, Han Ji-yoon watched his father being led away in handcuffs and felt nothing but relief. One of Ji-yoon's former bodyguards, now working witness protection, approached them carefully. "Mr. Han, you understand what this means? Your father will ensure there are consequences. You'll be marked." "I know," Ji-yoon said. He turned to Amara, rain streaming down his face. "But if I lose my family and gain you, I still win." Amara stepped forward, her hand finding his rain-soaked lapel. Her voice was clear, carrying over the sound of sirens and rain and the city that never stopped moving. "I choose you. But only if we are equals. No protecting me from hard truths. No making decisions without me. No power imbalances disguised as romance. We're partners, or we're nothing. Ji-yoon smiled then, a real smile, the first she'd seen that reached his eyes and stayed there. Partners. For however long you'll have me. That's a long time, Amara warned. But she was smiling too, the kind of smile that hurt her cheeks because it was so real, so utterly unexpected after everything they'd survived. He pulled an umbrella from somewhere. Black. Simple. Exactly what she'd expect from him. He opened it, holding it above her head while rain continued to soak his shoulders. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. This man, who'd commanded empires with a word, was choosing to stand in the rain so she could stay dry. From now on, Ji-yoon said quietly, his voice for her alone, no mafia can touch my CEO. The umbrella tilted toward her completely, power bowing before integrity. A man choosing love over legacy. And in that moment, Amara Blake understood what her grandmother had always meant when she talked about real romance. The kind that asked you to be brave, that demanded equality, that said, I see you, I choose you, and I'll stand in the rain so you don't have to. Below, Agent Chen was coordinating arrests. News helicopters circled overhead, cameras capturing the moment a criminal empire fell. And on that rooftop, two people who should never have met, who came from worlds that weren't supposed to intersect, stood together under a black umbrella and chose love. Not the easy kind, not the fairy tale kind, but the kind that required courage, honesty, and the willingness to rebuild everything from scratch. The kind that asked, are you brave enough to be vulnerable? Strong enough to be equal? Wise enough to know that real power comes from lifting people up, not pushing them down? Amara had asked those questions her whole life. And now, standing in the rain with a former Mafia heir who'd given up everything for what was right, she finally had her answer. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. 6 months later, the community center in Brooklyn was packed. Patients Blake MedTech had helped stood alongside families who'd benefited from the criminal network's collapse. The FBI had recovered millions in stolen funds, using them to establish a victim compensation program. Ji-yoon had started a nonprofit to help people leaving organized crime rebuild their lives, offering job training, housing assistance, and proof that change was possible. Amara's company had doubled in size, free from the shadow of corruption. She'd hired those 3 engineers she needed, expanded to 5 more hospitals, and every time someone asked her how she'd survived the attack on the Brooklyn Bridge, she said, I didn't survive it alone. Today, they were announcing a new partnership. Blake MedTech's AI would now be available to underserved communities at no cost, funded by the recovered funds. Justice turned into healing. Crime transformed into care. A little girl, no more than 8, with bright eyes and braided hair, approached Ji-yoon as he stood by the refreshment table. She tugged on his sleeve until he knelt down to her level. Are you the man who fought the bad guys? She asked, her voice serious. Ji-yoon smiled gently. I helped. Yes. Were you scared? Every single day. But sometimes being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about choosing what's right even when your knees are shaking. The girl considered this seriously. Then she hugged him, fierce and unexpected, and whispered, Thank you for saving Ms. Amara. She's the one who made my grandma's medicine work. Amara watched from across the room, her heart impossibly full. This was what love looked like in the real world. Not violins and sunset kisses, though they'd had their share of those too. But 2 people who'd looked at the hardest possible road and said, let's walk it together. Let's be honest. Let's be equals. Let's build something that matters. That night, as they walked home through Brooklyn streets lit by summer twilight, Ji-yoon took her hand. No regrets? Only one, Amara said. She looked up at him, This man who transformed from shadow to light, from inheritance to integrity. I wish my grandmother could have met you. She would have liked you. Because I held the umbrella over you instead of myself? Because you chose me when it cost you everything, and because you taught me that sometimes the most motivational thing a person can do is change. Really, truly change. Not for applause or recognition, but because staying the same would mean betraying who they could become. Ji-yoon stopped walking. They stood on a corner where two neighborhoods met, brownstones on one side, new development on the other, the city eternally rebuilding itself. He cupped her face in his hands, and his touch was gentle, reverent. You saved me long before I saved you. You just didn't know it. Then we're even, Amara said. And when he kissed her, it was soft, unhurried. The kind of kiss that promised tomorrow and next week, and years of tomorrows after that. A couple of neighbors walking past smiled at them. An elderly woman called out a greeting, and Ji-yoon waved back warmly. The city moved around them, indifferent and eternal, but in that moment they were exactly where they needed to be. Later, much later, when they were sitting on their apartment rooftop watching the city lights, Ji-yoon said quietly, "I've been thinking about the future." "Good or bad thinking?" Amara asked. She was tucked against his side, his arm around her shoulders, comfortable in a way she'd never imagined possible. "Good. I want to start a family someday. Not soon, not until we're both ready, but someday. Kids who grow up knowing that integrity matters, that choices have consequences, that you can be powerful and kind at the same time." Amara's breath caught. They'd never talked about this, the gentle signal of futures beyond themselves. But now, with his words hanging in the summer air and the city sparkling below them, she felt something slot into place. This was more than romance. This was partnership, commitment, the kind of love that built families and legacies and reminded the world that goodness still existed. "Someday," she agreed, "when we're ready, when the world's a little safer, when we've built something worth passing down." "Deal," Ji-yoon said. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "But for now, this is enough. You and me, one impossible choice at a time." And it was. It really, truly was. Thank you for walking this journey with Amara and Ji-yoon, two people who proved that love isn't about being perfect, but about being brave enough to choose each other when the world says you shouldn't. If this story moved you, I'd love to know, what moment resonated most with your heart? Drop a comment below, and if you believe in second chances, moral courage, and love that transforms, subscribe so we can share more stories of hope, justice, and the kind of romance that changes everything. These aren't just stories. They're reminders that no matter where we come from, we all have the power to choose who we become. And sometimes, choosing love is the most courageous thing we'll ever do.